From telesales to CCO at Normative IO, Neil Ryland has experience being an IC and leading hugely successful global sales teams from the ground up. Neil has played an instrumental role in scaling Peakon to acquisition in 2021 for $700 million, in which he learned the magic of people. In today's episode, we sit down to discuss how to effectively scale a business to exit. He'll be sharing his learnings, mistakes, successes, which will hopefully help those who are looking to follow in his footsteps. We cover how to pick the right company for you, find something that's a driver, build cultures, and make an impact as a leader. Neil is such an inspiration and incredible leader, so I'm excited for you to get real value from this conversation. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Sales Unfiltered. Today I am so honoured to be joined by Neil Ryland, CCO at Normative. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, it's great to be here.
Neil, today we're talking about scaling a business to exit. So for those that don't know who you are, which quite frankly I'm sure most people do, but why should they be listening to this episode today, and what experience do you have about taking businesses to exit?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first of all, Neil, so I've been in tech disruptive sales now for scarily coming up to 20 years. Still frightens me.
Don't put an age on it. No.
I know, but the looks give it away anyway. But so yeah, my background, actually, I've got like a degree in sports science. Set up a few of my own kind of businesses like personal training and realised wasn't quite good at it. You can imagine being 5 foot nothing and trying to be a PT and go in and coach people who are like 6'3" how to do stuff. It didn't quite work.
You're like, lift me up to the bars, please.
Yeah, exactly. Let me show you this technique. So that didn't work. But what I realised quickly was that, look, I need to build up my confidence. If you're going to go into gyms, and I think in any walk of life, you do a form of sales, right? And you've got to be confident in your own skin. So that's how I kind of ended up falling into sales. And obviously I had lucky to have a lot of good mentors to help me get into the game. And then through that got into leadership, very lucky again to work with a company called Huddle, which is one of kind of the tech darlings of the UK back in the day. It's like an amazing adventure of Andy and Ali. And that's when my first kind of step into leadership was, which I loved. It kind of got back to my roots, playing sport and coaching, and feeling like, you could help people to achieve something. Loved it. We exited Huddle and then joined a company called Peakon, which we started as a tiny little company in Denmark and scaled that to the exit at Workday, and it's now more recently at Normative, helping to drive the right actions on climate change.
And that exit was $700 million.
$700 million to Workday, in 2021. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. That must feel like such a huge sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I'm so proud of all the team that helped us to get there. But it's also the fun of the journey. I think it's weird. You kind of always think, what does this look like? We're going to have a big exit. We're going to take the company public. And you have all those struggles in scaling a company, obviously good days and bad days. And now when I chat to people, we always look back with the roast into glass. It was amazing. And I'm like, well, there were so many speed bumps that we hit on the journey. So yeah, it was brilliant. But what it made me realize is that the journey is the fun part. That's the bit that's really exciting.
Well, that's where I really want to unpack today, is it seems like you were on such a great path with Peakon, then to Workday. Why leave and go to Normative? What is that? It seems like you've got that hunger and that drive with Huddle, and now what you're doing at the moment with this venture. What is that thing that keeps you ticking forward?
Yeah, sure. I think one, I love building, right? That's just a thing. I get a real kick out of taking a concept, an idea, and trying to turn it into something that's real. And then the second part to that is that I love the kind of development side of things. But if I say like what made me change, well, there's three things I think that I love doing from work. Right? We naturally spend more time at work than we do anywhere else, or those kind of adages everyone would say. But I think the three things that really excite me and I look for when I go into a job is like, I want to work with a founder that is mega passionate around the mission of the company. Right? Not just because there's a hot market, there's an opportunity to make money, everyone else is doing it. They're visionary and they're like, no, I think there's something here that could genuinely make a change. I think the second part to it is that you need to personally then care about what you're doing. Like you could bucket it under development, I think, to like an extent of like what's in this for you. Is it going to develop you? Is it going to grow you? You're going to be outside your comfort zone a little bit, and the opportunities that exist for you. And then lastly, I think around like, what are the people like? What's the culture going to be like at this company? Like, do they put people at the heart of it? And I think when you kind of line those three things up, along with like a market that has the potential, I say like, has this got the potential to be something massive? I think when all those things come together, Like, you've got a chance, right? You've got a chance of a Peakon or a Huddle or one of these other amazing tech companies that we see.
What was it about Normative that attracted you? Was it all of the above, or was there one? Because I know it's very mission driven as a company.
Yeah, there was a couple actually. So there's always the adage of when you know great people, you're naturally attracted to them. And the chairman of Normative is one of the previous founders of Peakon, and I have a great relationship with Caspar. So the fact that he was involved was a big draw because I know the type of business he wants to get involved in. I know what he's like in terms of the kind of culture that he would want to bring to a company, even as chairman, what he would encourage and what he would want to see from the founder. So I don't think the space. I think that the space is going to explode. If I look at like the transitions that happen in disruptive technology, I go right back to Huddle, right? Like people were still on, show my age now, but people were still using like C drives, right? They'd save things locally, right? That's how old I am. But it was going to be this transition in the world of the drop boxes, the box. And okay, we probably didn't win that race in Huddle, but we were in it. And that was exciting to be in that race. And then I think the same for the transformation in HR. Like, at the time when Peakon started, it was like this absurd, crazy idea to think you could ask for people to give them feedback on a weekly basis. They're like, are you mental? No one wants to give feedback on a weekly basis. We do our annual survey and that's what we do. And then post-pandemic, it's incredibly normal to give feedback on a consistent basis. I mean, we do it at airports when you walk through every time you give feedback, right? Like people want to give feedback. So I like this concept of what's challenging and changing. And I think the market for carbon data and disclosures will also transform. And I think that excites me. It's like, this is going to be a thing. It's going to be huge. And then I got to know the founder, Christian, who has been waving the flag for, sustainability and carbon emissions, for many, many years, and has been committed to the cause despite many obstacles. And I think that's really inspiring that like, yes, the market's now catching up with where this guy saw it was going. And I think that shows he's committed and he's passionate around doing the right thing. And then there was a little bit of my own reflection of what do I want to do next. And I was like, do I want to go and do more advisory of startups? Because I love the coaching part of saying. But equally, God, this sounds really cheesy, but like there was a genuine moment, I was like, I'd become like a dad. And I was like, oh God, like at some point Flo's going to go into school. I'm like, what does your dad do, right? And I was like, he's a sales guy. Or can I be really cheesy? He's saving the planet. But there was like an element of like, I really want to do something that's quite meaningful. And I think those things all kind of came together. Like there was a way to build a really successful company here and build careers and help people to have something amazing on their CV. And at the same time, I knew it was something that like, on the rainy days or the tough quarters, I'd still be like unbelievably motivated to go in and win. So those things kind of all came together quite nicely of Normative.
It's nice to go home and think, I'm doing good.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm
Let me just hang up my superhero cape so that Flora can see
that's what I tell myself. Yeah, exactly.
Did you bring it today?
So it's hanging up just
Oh, yeah, of course.
Thanks for missing it.
Sorry, I was wondering what was over there. But it's nice, I think, like you mentioned, we spend so much of our lives at work. So it's really important that we do something that we love, but also they're really passionate. And when you're as mission driven as you are, and I think to be able to scale a business to exit, you have to be mission driven and you have to wholeheartedly believe in that business and where you're trying to take it. If it can do something that is going to be so instrumental and change the planet, then that's just going to make it so much easier to wake up every morning and go to sleep.
Oh, totally. Building startups is hard, right? Like I said, why would you do it if you don't believe in it?
Yeah.
There's way easier ways to make money and spend your time. Like I think, whereas if you've got like a real passion, you believe in it, they're the things that push through. And I think why some startups are successful, sometimes it is a little bit just pure belief and a bit of brute force that kind of gets you through those tougher years, tougher quarters, and the conviction for people to invest money in scaling the company.
So for people that are watching this today that maybe want to go through the same career that you've experienced and take their businesses to exit or find a business that they really truly believe in, I want to get to the grips of what is that we're looking for. So you mentioned Caspar as somebody that you followed and that you knew and trusted to work for. But for those that maybe don't have somebody that they can necessarily follow to the next company, what is that you're looking for in the founders? How do you really unpack if they are being true to their word? Because it's all great having your values and your mission written on the wall, but to really make sure that they are authentic with that and do full-heartedly believe in that mission, how do you unpack that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing is that, I didn't know anyone. I moved to London, right? So I moved to London and didn't know anyone. And I think part of that is then being brave and putting yourself out there, like the networking events that exist, you know, and it is like filling your name badge and like, you know, you walk around, you don't know anyone. Those things are hard, right? It's a slog and it's very easy to avoid them and be like, I'm just going to go home and watch Netflix or whatever it might be. I think the first thing is to get yourself into the position to be lucky to find a great founder. You have to go and join these networking events. I joined Toastmasters and things like that and just wanted to go and meet people and you set myself a challenge. Like before you go home, you're going to have 3 conversations with people. Like, you know, and if I was feeling really up for it, like 5, you know, but like I used to push myself to get out there. And I think that's the first thing. You need to go out and meet the people there and then spend the time investing in it. I think then once you've got the opportunity to speak with the founder, I was like, I like people that are just authentic in themselves, right? Like they're quite humble around what they're trying to achieve, but you can see they have conviction. And the way that I look for conviction is, do they know where the market is today and why it's ready to be disrupted, why it needs to be changed? And if they talk around like the people and the stories of that versus I just want to build a really big company, you know, really excited about just like growing, scaling, want to go into the US. I'm like, yeah, obviously, but like that stuff comes off of the heartbeat of the company and then the logical stuff comes afterwards. So I think drilling into that piece, I think you mentioned values is important. So many companies have values like integrity, you know, like it's like, wow, yeah. Obviously, you know, it'd be weird if you didn't. You know, do the values speak to what's core to you? And can they unpack them? Because I think values are often associated to the behaviors. Like you can write whatever you want on a wall, but the question I would ask is, okay, what are the behaviors you expect to see associated to that value? And then you avoid the kind of it's just painted on the wall or it's written on the website to help with our kind of talent attraction program.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few questions you can ask that dive into like how founders think about the values, how they measure them, you know, and how they expect them to be lived like in the company and with customers. And that will get you a bit closer to knowing if you're working with people that genuinely care about doing the right thing rather than just trying to flip a company. What
are the values that Normative have?
So Normative have 3 core values. So the first one is one team, which I love. You know, this is a huge mission. Like our mission is to try to measure and reduce the economic impact of all activities on the planet. I mean, that's like huge. If we get like 5% of the way on doing that, we'll have had a massive impact, but you're not going to do that on your own. So I love this concept of one team. And it also is our customers have to be part of it. We have a thing around own what matters. I think one of the classic mistakes startups can do is that you kind of have like 15 ideas in one. That's pretty hard to scale. Like you need to pick one thing and be brilliant at it. And I think we have this big thing on like owning what matters, what gets us closest to our OKRs, to the goals for that year, to your team's success, to the company's mission. Are you doing that? And then we have build the norm, which is around, you know, every time that you want to raise the bar, like get above the benchmark. And we need to do that. We need to create the standard for what it means to drive climate change and not just measure it and say tick. You know, that's one part to it. Like you've got to drive reduction. So we want to build the norm and standardize this whole process.
Yeah.
So those things really stood to me because they're unique to the company and unique to what we're trying to do rather than just bingo buzzword, which some values are.
No integrity at Normative.
Exactly, yeah. Let's cut that one, shall we?
No, but I think it's really nice that you can see the outcome of like where you want to go with those values, and they are really different, and it shows that there's been a lot of thought that's gone into them. I love your point about focusing on one thing because it can be really easy to, and especially if you're going into a business and you're looking to scale it, you're thinking, right, let's do absolutely everything. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on if you meet a founder that has a million ideas and they're wanting to execute everything all at once. There's probably 2 prongs to that where, yes, it's great, they're ambitious. You can see that they're never going to run out of ideas, hopefully, and that you can get stuck in and there's that excitement. But what is the fear and how do you navigate whether it's a founder that's maybe a little bit unrealistic with their ideas, or if it is a founder that has the potential to do all of those things, but maybe you need to come in as the leader and go, right, let's sit down and focus on which one do we tackle first?
Yeah, totally. And I think to be a founder is unbelievably brave and bold in the first place. So they're naturally sometimes, like they can see things that you can't even see, right? And I think some of that is around being able to unpack that. And a big part for me as a sales leader going into that was like, is this someone that's going to give me the autonomy to be able to take that and decomment and go, like, we need to meet the kind of market where it is today, you know, and we need to have a product that is relevant for people where they are today. And if I give like the Peakon example, I said like weekly surveys. That was the vision, that the owners are like, no, this is real-time people data, that's capturing all the time so you can make instant decisions around it. And I was like, that's great. But when I go into meetings and say that, people think that I've lost the plot. So we need to basically create this as a journey. That's the vision. How do we build a product and a go-to-market strategy that allows us to win today and bring people to where we want to get to? Mm-hmm. And I think if you're working with a founder that gives you this is also from like a sales leadership point of view, but again, picking the right company, are they realistic of like how you get to where that vision is? Can they articulate where the market is today and how you can educate the market, how you can bring people through, building sponsors, kind of crossing the chasm book? Are they aware of those things and what's needed to drive that change? And that also comes, I think, who's the sales leader you're working with, or if you are the sales leader going into that, are you going to have a founder that can't let go? And I understand that. I have a lot of respect for them, but at some point they have to know they've got to let go.
Yeah.
You can't keep diving in and standing on toes, because it will prevent the scaling of an organization. And then equally, you do have founders that like, you have to control what we want to focus on. I want the conviction of like, this is where the market's going. These are the bets that we're placing, because that's your differentiator of your competition. And I think founders that are aware of that is what you're kind of looking for.
And then the last question of this whole finding the right organization to work for, I'm sure research comes a lot into this. And you've mentioned looking at the market and making sure it's a market that's going to stand the test of time, and maybe trends and competitors. But if you were to give us some actionables of, right, what are those things that you would do your research on to make sure that this is the right business to join, and maybe some red flags to stay away from?
Yeah, I think one thing I look at is like, how big is the current market? And there's obviously lots of ways you can just Google some of these things. You can look at the top competition that's in it and the size of those organizations, and look who are they selling to, who are they winning with, what are they currently doing? Mm-hmm. And that's just one thing. Is this market one at the moment that's big enough to absorb another player in? And you can get a steer from that. I think the second thing I would say is like, is this a kind of business that Google or Microsoft could replicate, right? Because I think taking on Microsoft and Google is a challenge, right? Yeah, exactly. So you're looking like, is this something that's going to be a complement? And maybe Huddle's a good example of that. If you now look at like the cloud, everyone has a OneDrive or a G Drive account. And we were creating this idea of like file sharing, which was tough, right? Like, so we quickly realized that actually picking on Microsoft as an enemy, and I think when we reflect back, and I'm sure Ali and Andy was saying that was a real challenge. You could look at different pivot points of if we'd gone down a complement message, what would have happened? So think about like, who's the likely competition that's going to come out of the back of it. I think the other thing from the market point of view that I look at is like, when was the last time it's kind of been massively disrupted? And who's the ultimate decision maker in it? Is there a C-level buyer that would care about this? So again, if I go back to like file sharing, this is a security angle, CIOs carry weight in a company. There's definitely an angle where you're going to have budget allocated to it. If I look at like the people side in HR hadn't been transformed in the same way that it is now, and maybe the pandemic drove a lot of that, right? There was a lot of HRs that went from kind of being in the background to suddenly at the forefront, like, oh my God, fix this problem. Everyone's got to work from home. We don't have the kind of face-to-face mentoring anymore. So I think looking for like, when was the last transformation within a market space is another thing we can start to get an idea on whether there's a real opportunity to be successful.
Yeah. And then when you're in the company, you found your perfect fit and you've started. I think one of the things that you mentioned of taking a business to exit is the culture and the people. You've even got that on your LinkedIn, like the power of people. And you've mentioned to me when we previously spoke, you've got to find that magic formula. What do you mean by that? And how do you find that? I mean, the big question is, like, how do we?
Yeah, people
how do
everything.
You do magic?
I always get asked, like, when if we're on interviews now, and people say to you, like, oh, what's your biggest concern for scaling Normative, or your biggest concern on Norpan? I always say it's the people. I was like, because I've got the right people in place. I don't care what problem gets thrown at us. Because if you've got the right people, you'll find a solution. When you don't have the right people, those problems can bite you. So I think that's absolutely crucial of any leader. And again, come back to founders, like that's why I said, like, what do they care about the people? Where they think about people and hiring, and what do they need to be successful to realize their vision? And that's the magic. I used to say when I was working at Peakon, the trick is to buy Peakon. That's how you uncover it. But
now what do people buy?
Yeah, exactly. Now what people do. For me, the three core traits that I always look for and question to try to get this magic formula of when you get this team together is, the anagram's LAT. And it stands for loyalty, attitude, tenacity. And I say those three things because I do not have a clue how to coach them. And I don't know anyone that can coach them. I think they're either innately important to you or they're not. And I don't mean by loyalty, you've got to be married for 10 years. I'm talking about like the loyalty is, if you have something in mind you want to do, are you loyal to the goal and the mission? Like, if plan A doesn't work, 26 letters in the alphabet, right? Keep going, and that's so important. Then I talk about like attitude, like a can-do attitude. I got that when I kind of came into this office, right? You just get the feeling of like there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be hurdles. Of course there is. Building companies hard.
Yeah.
But if you have a can-do attitude rather than a cannot attitude, it lifts the entire company. It lifts your peers. It lifts your team. So I look for people that have that kind of can-do attitude. And then the tenacity is a kind of fire in the belly. Like, why do you want to win? Does this matter to you? And we designed some of like our interview processes around those kind of core things, like the storytelling, the scenarios, because that's what I'm trying to feel out on that person. You can coach skills, you can coach some things on like the product knowledge, and it helps maybe if you've worked in the space for a while. It can be a hindrance as well. But those three things, I think if you have those in your team and in your company, you're in the best position to be successful.
Can you share what is one of the best like tasks that you've got somebody to do, or questions that really unpacks the lat?
The lat. I think it's called like scenario ones around like toughest challenges that people have had. I like hearing how long people have stuck in like their worst jobs. I think when people haven't had a really tough job before, that's a red flag for me, or an amber flag, because you can't stick it out. I think we're always keen then on testing on like that kind of can-do attitude, and it's slightly abstract as a question, but we always ask people around, okay, if you're going into like a final proposal and then you get some inside information that you know who you're up against in the final pitch, the person you're up against is you. How do you beat you? Right. And what we're testing for is, can they then self-reflect to describe their own traits of how they could win this deal or how they'd find the weaknesses? And I think that unpacks a lot of those questions about people even realizing and not having to be so direct of like, tell me a time when you've done everything to win. Like, I'm just trying to extract information, how they think about going around that kind of that obstacle. And you see it kind of blows people and they're like, oh my God, how would I beat me? Yeah.
You're like, oh God, that would be really hard.
Yeah.
I'm going to be so presentery. How would you beat yourself?
How would I beat myself? Do you know what? I'm told, I think one of my strengths is that I really genuinely care about how the company can be successful. Like, I'm just naturally inquisitive on like learning. One of the gaps sometimes is I'm probably not as organized as what I should be. And I use the strength of knowing hopefully the person and the business to overcome those. So the way that I would probably beat myself is being incredibly organized and structured in terms of pulling in the right people at the right time, etc., and probably trying to find gaps where I would be relying on relationship skills sometimes maybe to get through things. And again, I think as you kind of mature as a person and as a leader, you realize you're never going to be 10 out of 10 on everything. I like P&G reviews, but go, these are your weaknesses, one of the worst things. I'm like, double down on your strengths and figure out who you can work with and collaborate with to cover some of your gaps. I think that's how I would find a way to beat me, is being a lot more organised.
Great answer. I think that's really good though, because as you said, like, you're not going to be the perfect person, and actually the strength of being a good leader is picking out those weak spots and then hiring to fill those. So like, you're not a one-man band, you're going to have a team around you. So you need to make sure that you've got people that have those qualities that are going to build an incredible team and not just 10 of Neils.
Yeah, totally. And I look at the concept point like building like diversity into your team, but also like, so when you're kind of very self-aware of where those gaps are, I think that also builds a lot of trust.
Yeah.
Because you humanize the process, right? No one's perfect. No one's sensitive they are as a liar, right? And I look at like the team now at Normative, and I feel very privileged that a lot of the people that are at Normative are people that I've worked with for long periods of time. There's a guy called Bart that runs RevOps. I've worked with at Huddle and at Peakon.
Oh, really?
And he knows me inside out and I know him inside out. Yeah. But he is brilliant at all the data analytics, all of the processes, and he's super good at, he knows what I want to get to as an outcome, but he'll challenge me on the best way to get there. Because we agree on the outcome, but we have this great way of thinking. He's very process driven, incredibly good with the systems. And I'm looking at going, I need to get this information to my rep, so I need to drive up rep productivity. Yeah. So between us, we have this great way of working where I can get us to where we need to be as quickly, but he'll make sure that the process is the right one and people adopt it. So I think that's one, it's a good way to beat me. It's like Bart would be able to beat me on certain things for sure.
Yeah.
But when you put those things together, come to your original question, that's how you create the magic, right? The diversity in thinking is what enables you to come to the right solution.
Because you've mentioned when we spoke before, diversity is not gender or colour, it's so much more.
Yeah.
And when you think about neurodiversity, diversity of thought, how are you making sure that you are building the best diverse team? Is it through those questionings in the interview process? Is it through different ways of sourcing talent to make sure that you've got that strongest team?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above, right? And diversity in backgrounds and people's upbringing, their views on the world. I think all those things are really, really important coming to the table. I think there's obviously lots of, I come from the HR background from Peakon, there's lots of things that you can put in place around your recruitment process. Like we make sure that when you're interviewing, the panel you're interviewing with is diverse. You don't just meet one person or one gender or whatever. Like we try to make sure that the panel is nice and diverse. We ensure that when we're going through screening processes, we're careful on things like pictures and photos and all those types of things so that you don't make your unconscious bias decisions off the back of it. We have kind of clear scoring programs. The questions are set so that, again, like within reason, we can do like for like comparisons.
That's really smart. Jacqueline de Gournay came on last season and she said that.
Yeah.
She said it's otherwise you're just going, oh, I think I really liked them because of this. And it's not down to an actual scoring system. You've got those biases
and
there.
The questions, like, there's, again, interviews will flow and conversations will change. But like we have these are the questions you need to ask because then we can make the right comparison, or it's consistent in the way we're running the process. Otherwise, you instantly create a bias because if you have like a connection with someone, I don't know, you support the same football team or whatever it might be, and then you don't come back to some kind of structure, you're naturally going to puff. I've already made my mind up. I like this person. I think another really key thing that I think people miss sometimes is I try not to hear too much on that. If they've got through to the next stage, I don't want to hear all the feedback on the person because if they're like, I really like, but they had a good experience, so I put them through on that basis. I've now already got a bias of like what I'm going to go in and ask about. And I'm like, no, I've got the structure. I'm going to make my decision based on it, and then we'll get together at the end. Otherwise, obviously, I trust my colleague. So I come in with this bias of like, oh, I thought they were a little bit smarmy or a little bit like this. And I think that influences going into the room how I feel about the person, which is then not fair. They might have been having a bad day and there might have been something else impacting on the interview. So I think there's things that you can do and working with like your HR leaders to just make sure that you're putting yourself in the best position. It's hard to hire on diversity and you're criticised a lot as a leader when you get it wrong. And it is a real challenge of trying to get it right. But I think if you're open on your policies and your processes and you're doing all the right things, you'll end up with the best candidate. And that's a fair process. And most of the time you end up with a diverse team if you're doing that anyway.
Yeah, really great points. And I think it's so important to just have that clear outcome, as you mentioned. Otherwise, if you are going in, everybody's going to maybe ask different questions as well and come out if you're maybe not there one day and somebody else is doing the interview. It's really important for you all to be aligned and singing off the same hymn sheet. And when we're speaking about building those successful teams, I know that you've led teams in different regions and you're quite passionate about speaking about culture and building cultures in different regions as well. So does it need to grow organically from that different region? Or are you trying to create a carbon copy of the culture that you have in the UK in a different country? Because there can be completely different people that are working there, different ways of living, different ways of selling as well. So what advice would you give to people if they're starting to do that in a different region? Yeah,
I think the first thing is make sure that culture is something you chat about as an executive team. It's not something you write on the wall, like, something like, and I think that's some of the people go, oh, I really want the culture as the classic, and I want it to be a work hard, play hard. Like, I hear that all the time. And it's one of the, like, for me, one of the worst puns of like, that's the best way you can describe your culture. You're the same as every other company that's been around for however long.
Yeah.
Because culture's fluid. As you scale and build a company, the culture when you're 20 people is naturally going to be different to when you're 500 people. It's the nature of the beast. I think what should be consistent, though, is the values and the behaviors that are associated to being part of your company. To be a Wiser, to be a Normate, to be a Peakon, there's something that you should feel. And that comes from the values and the behaviors that you expect in the company, from the top right the way through to your entry-level employees. And that means you're then culturally sensitive, that when you go into Germany or into France is traditionally very hierarchical as the way they run business. Germany can be very formal. I mean, I'm stereotyping here, but we now are HQ'd in Sweden, and they are incredibly passionate around doing the right thing. It's also a lot of like collective decision making. And it's not a bad thing. It's how do you embrace that and bring it into, is it being lived within the values of the company? And that way you actually get this brilliant mix of creating your own culture that's covering the diversity of all the regions that you work in. But I think you have to be culturally sensitive is the word that I would think through, we were joking earlier, right? If you're calling into the US, it's pretty annoying if you're not respectful. That could be like 10 p.m. in the UK for someone and you're kind of putting calls in. So, okay, so how do we manage that process? We also need to be respectful. There's only 2 hour crossover. So do you create something where people have flexibility in the hours that they work to manage the fact you're now an international business?
And some people might be Chiefs fans and some people might be
Niners fans. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you're very careful of what you use.
After the Super Bowl.
And I was like, one of my favorite ones since joining Normative was like, and I'd worked for a Danish company, so to be fair, I should have remembered this, but like, it's very different around like lunch hours in the Nordics compared to the UK. Like we're kind of like I'm just going to run out and grab a sandwich. That's what we do. No one thinks anything else of it. In Sweden, that like hits midday. In our office, there's like 15 microwaves because that's what they do. They bring the lunch in the microwave. Yeah, and it's really important that people have that time. So when we're booking meetings, we're sensitive to the fact that's important. In Sweden, I think just like I said, just being culturally sensitive and then having the values, which is around, one team, I think help us to bring everyone aligned, regardless of background, cultural, where you sell, etc., because we're just culturally sensitive to it. We don't always get it right, by the way, but if you have good intent, then it avoids it ever being an issue and people can kind of discuss, what works for them.
I think, and to your point of why I guess you've been successful, being a natural curious leader is really important to make sure that you're understanding your people so that you can be sensitive to that and build values and ways of working that really, hopefully, hit the nail on the head for everybody and make everybody feel included in that company.
Totally. Taking the time to know about things is one of the most important things of being like a good leader. Like, I'm not saying you have to remember everyone's cat and dog name. It gets harder as a company gets bigger. But I think spending time with, as you get to like the frontline leaders and running, like we always have like the reverse mentoring programs, where you're seeing and understanding more around how the company works, how individuals join the business, what's important now to like our SDR team that maybe wasn't important when I was an SDR many years ago. It's changed. And I think if you're a leader, if you're not spending time understanding all of those things, as well as the cultural differences when you scale internationally, you're not putting yourself in the best position to build a business that can scale off your values. And for me, like I said, the magic of people that's what's so crucial.
So we've built an incredible culture. You've found the magic of people. And then I think playing the part as a leader is so impactful on the success of scaling a business to exit. So from your experience, what impact do leaders have? And how can you really build and foster those strong relationships to be a success?
Yeah, I think it's crucial. Again, the old adage, if people don't leave jobs, they leave managers is so true. And when I look at like our data, I would say to my frontline managers that there's lots of things in here, learning development scores, autonomy. The one that I've always got my eye on is relationship with manager. Because again, I think if you've got a great relationship with your manager, well, there's other things can be fixed. Pay, reward, recognition, that comes from being able to have a really good, open, candid conversation with your leader. So I think that's the first part as a company and everything, like make sure that's something that you think about. And that's everything from like, are the one-to-ones prioritized? As a leader, do you spend time doing skip levels? Spend time understand what's it like on the front line still. Are you aware of the challenges that cause some of you two up in the clouds just being like, I'm just managing a spreadsheet and data. And I'm not saying that you need to do that, of course, but the fun part is learning like, how do you make people successful? How do you scale the company? And that comes from spending time with the people.
Yeah.
So the way that I try to think about leadership is like your job is to get the rocks out of the way, right? Like if someone is struggling, your job is there to move it and help them to kind of reach the end goal. And you've got to define the parameters. Now I've got like a toddler, so it's a bit like a playground, right? Leadership, you kind of build the playground. We've got to play in here, whether that's like as a sales leader, your ICP, whether it's the company, it's the values, you're creating the framework. But what you do inside the playground, like go crazy. Let's go and be creative. Let's solve problems. Let's work together, help people to reach their full potential. And I think that's leader's job is to be serving. Like if you make other people successful as a leader, you are successful. And I think people need to feel that as a leader, that when the chips are down, you step forward and take the hits. And then behind closed doors, you figure things out, and figure out a way to make someone successful or help them to address what the mistake, whenever it might be. And then when they're successful, you disappear into the background a little bit and let them have the limelight. And that, again, builds so much trust and so much credibility. And the feeling of like, as a leader, you care about them as a person. And in return, you'll get the loyalty back, right? When you really need it and you're like, it's quarter end, I need you to pull in the best case, I need you to scrap for a little bit harder.
Yeah.
People have a reason to want to do it.
Well, they'll respect you, won't they? And I also think like you always need to lead with example. So to your point that you said initially, like make sure that you're getting in the trenches, being involved, not just sitting in your office and having a lovely time.
Yeah. And
it's important to get involved.
Definitely. And I think again, as you kind of move from first line leader, second line, third line, you've also got to get the balance right of really good communication. I got told like an old adage from an old manager, which is like, tell him again, tell him what you're going to tell him, and then tell him, because it helps to reiterate the message, but it also means that if I'm being really clear with my communication, I never feel like I'm stepping on my sales manager's toes, right? If I'm chasing the reps on deals and my manager's doing the same thing, the rep doesn't feel good on that. My manager feels like I'm doing their job for them. So you kind of break that kind of circle of trust. So again, it's around managing expectations. It's around good communication. It's around explain the purpose and the intent of what you're trying to do. When I do a skip levels, I'm not trying to catch someone out. I just want to know how I can help more. And it's the truth. And I think that comes again from living the values. Otherwise it looks like, oh God, my boss is joining this call. And I never want it to be a fear thing. I want it to be a thing of like, amazing. There's an opportunity to coach, an opportunity to help. And I think that's a really important thing that as a leader, you get that right with good communication.
Yeah. And we were talking before we started recording, Ellie Clayson that you used to work with at Peakon. She now works at Abacom as the SDR leader, and we were discussing navigating uncertain times. And she said it's about creating that psychological safety and making sure that your team understand and you are communicating with them. Because to your point, if you're just dictating and telling them what to do, or they'll probably not be bought on and invested and thinking, oh, Neil's just being difficult again. But actually they're like, oh no, this does make sense because this helps me, it helps the business, and they can see the outcome.
Definitely. I'm sure they still think I'm being difficult at times, probably, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's purpose. And I think I maybe missed a point earlier that was I should have made, which is when I talk around that behaviours associated to the values, like I think also as a sales leader, you have an opportunity to create a purpose within that team, right? That like unites everyone. You've got the mission, the North Star for the company. But like we always said at Peakon, we said like we want to be world class. Now you can't tell yourself you're world class. You need to hear people say it. I was like, whatever happens to the outcome of Peakon, I want people to like go, oh, I worked with that Peakon team. They were world class. When I said, I want to hear that, right? Like that's what we should be aspirationally aiming for. Okay, to do that, what are some things that we should hold ourselves accountable for? Because then you've got way more buy-in when it's peer to peer. Like because I can't be in every room. I don't want to be in every room. I don't want to police this. Yeah. I want it to be like a peer-to-peer level of commitment. We're all in this together. And if someone was late to a meeting in Peakon, I didn't have to like give them the eye or call them out. The rest of the team would be like, oh, because there was this real feeling of like, we're in this together and we know what we need to do and we've set high standards. We hold ourselves accountable to it. Not Neil, not hold accountable to me, because the minute I'm not in the room, you don't need to do it.
And that's culture. Culture is what happens when your back is turned and when you're not in the room.
Yeah. So people are like, what do you want to, if someone asked and said 3 words to describe Izzy, what would those 3 words be? And then when you're not in the room and someone asks a question, what 3 words do you think they say? Right. And your goal is to make sure that they match.
Yeah.
And that's around how you live, how you behave, how you want to be associated. And I think those things, again, are really important, especially in sales or commercial roles, like where you're working with customers, you're pulling favors from your teams, your technical teams, whatever it might be. I think it's so important that everyone buys into it and contributes to it as well.
Throughout your whole career, what has been the biggest highlight or your biggest success on scaling businesses?
I think, there's the obvious one on like exits, but actually for me, the thing I'm most proud of is that when I look at the kind of 3, and there are many examples here, so probably people I might have missed, but like there's 3 people that like really stand out to me. So there's Sarah, Molly, Rachel. They were all SDRs at Peakon, starting their career in sales, and they're now all senior AEs with me at Normative, leading the charge on culture, leading the charge on good activity in Salesforce, all the basics, and they're now coaching the next generation of like SDRs coming through. So one, I'm super humbled that they followed me again, or they're mad enough to follow me again. But the fact that I see them now and they're like, they were hosting, like when we'd had like our SKO, they're sat there running the panel presentations of customers. And I'm like, I remember interviewing you, like, you know, like when you had no idea on sales and they're just crushing it. And I think
proud dad
for me, yeah, massively. And they'll probably give me a hard time for saying it, but like I genuinely feel so much pride off the back of that. And now I look at the next generation of SDRs and be like, wouldn't it be amazing to go through the same journey at Normative, and they have that story on their CV that sets up their careers, and hopefully then they can reflect back and we can keep building this type of culture of businesses and sales environments, because you know, I like to think people enjoy it then.
That is the biggest testament to obviously how much of an incredible sales leader you are, that people have followed you and want to continue working with you. So what a lovely story to share. But thank you so much, Neil, for today. It's been really, really insightful. I've learned so much. I'm sure everybody listening has as well. And they're going to go and smash it in their next scaling of businesses. But as we end every episode here on Sales Unfiltered, what is one challenge that you faced in your life, in your career, that's shaped you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Oh, gosh, big question.
Just one. Everybody always struggles with just one.
Yeah, there's so many lessons learned.
How long do we have?
Yeah, there's one that always stands out to me. And my wife used to feel like it's a chip on my shoulder. But like, I remember sitting in one of the fundraising meetings at Peakon, and I was sat, the table was like this, and I sat the last person, and they did the introductions. And they went around this room, right, and there was analysts, and they were like, oh, I've got my degree in Harvard, you know, I've got my degree from Stanford, you know, I've got a first class honours from Cambridge. And I sat there being, oh my God, I've got a 2-1 in sports science from Lincoln. What am I going to say? Like, you know, and I literally, it was like, 5 minutes going, and I sat there, and I was like, oh, I feel so uncomfortable in this room, like, you know, the imposter syndrome. In the end, I just came out with the joke of like, I'm here because I'm not as good at rugby as what my mum told me I was. I've got a degree in catching, but I absolutely love building startups and selling stuff. So that's why and it kind of brought this laugh in the room of like a highbrow intellectual. I was like, this could massively backfire, but it worked. And I since then I've just been able to embrace the fact that like, that's me, like, you know, and I think again, like being comfortable in your own skin and sharing some of those things, you don't have to pretend to be something you're not. It's probably the biggest thing. I wish in my earlier days in sales, I probably embraced it rather than trying to like be something that I wasn't, you know, the stereotype, big chunky watch, big tie as a salesperson. You know, I think actually being humble and being likable, which is often just being yourself, are probably some of the biggest skills that will help you to be successful in leadership and in sales. So I'd say that was a very good epiphany moment for me of being brave and just saying it.
And be better at rugby.
And be better at rugby, yeah, exactly.
That's probably what they were all sat there going, yeah, I've got my Harvard degree, but that was such a good answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they're thinking, what sports am I not good at?
Yeah. Or they're thinking, where's Lincoln? But
yeah, probably. Hey, but a 2-1 is a great grade. So well done. You should be proud of that.
Yeah, exactly.
You did your mum proud.
Yeah, exactly.
I love the authenticity that you can share with people and realize that actually, yes, a lot of people come into a room feeling that imposter, and it's been so refreshing to see men sitting here that I've interviewed actually being really open about that, because it's not just women that go through it, it's everybody. And the sooner we realize that everybody's in the same boat, we're all just winging it, really, aren't we? And
everyone has insecurities, you know, like I said, like presentations, and like there are people that are like brilliant at them, but even those people have the kind of butterflies in their tummy, etc. So I think actually, it's being open and honest, actually, it breaks the barriers of nervousness anyway, and you'd find it's much easier being open.
I always find that if you're nervous, it shows that you care and that you're actually excited about what you're doing. If there are no nerves, there's no feeling, and you're probably in the wrong job and you should leave. So I was terrified to interview you today because I really cared about this conversation. But thank you so much, Neil. It was a great chatting to you, and best of luck for your new venture with Normative.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. Check out the channel for more episodes like this one, and we'll see you next week.